Hello, humans. This is the first in a series of three videos about three women doctors from late imperial China, which means Ming and Qing dynasty. Ming dynasty is 1368 to 1644, and Qing dynasty is 1644 to 1911. So this is the time period. Today I'm going to talk about Tán Yǔnxián, who was a Ming Dynasty doctor, and then I'll have two more for these other two women who left us significant amounts of writing. And so here you can see her dates, 1461 to 1556, kind of mid, mid Qing dynasty. And her book is called Miscellaneous Records of a Female Doctor. At least that's what I called it, 女醫 Záyán. And it was first published in 1511, and it's a book of case studies. So her basic story is that her paternal grandfather and grandmother taught her medicine. Actually, her paternal grandmother's family were doctors, and then the paternal grandfather married the grandmother and apparently moved into their house and studied medicine. At the same time, he was studying for the imperial exams and eventually passing. And so he kind of had two professions. One is he was a government official, and the other was that he also practiced medicine. The grandmother also practiced medicine. I imagine that when women patients came, they saw the grandmother, and when male patients came, they saw the grandfather. I don't know, that's just my guess. But their children their sons all became government officials and weren't interested in medicine because it's higher status to be a government official. And so they really, even though they had a family tradition, they didn't have anyone to pass it on to. So when Tan was, a child, they eventually, we'll see, you'll hear the story, they decided to teach her. I just want to point out that she was highly literate. She studied the same text as her male colleagues. She, quoted them and cited them, all the time, and had a wide range of knowledge about various medical texts. So this wasn't only a lineage. She had both lineage and the scholarly aspects of the medicine. It seems she only treated women and girls. Maybe in an emergency, she might write a formula for her husband or some other male in the family, who knows? But the main part of her practice was women and girls. But this wasn't gynecology. This was general practice for women and girls. She treated everything from insomnia to nausea to, whatever, as well as all the stuff to do with gynecology and childbirth and postpartum and so forth. She was an herbal doctor, and she did use moxa a lot. At least she wrote about using moxa a lot, but she didn't write about acupuncture at all. So it's unclear. Maybe she never practiced acupuncture at all, or maybe that just wasn't the big part of her practice. But acupuncture had lower status than had lower status than herbal medicine. And surprisingly, lots of herbal doctors used moxa, but didn't use acupuncture. That's something I researched and found a while ago. So she wrote this book, Miscellaneous Records of a Female Doctor. It has 31 case studies. It also has some prefaces and postscripts that kind of give us some biographical information, including she wrote her own introduction or preface. By the way, this book is translated by me and with my friend Rena Liu, Dr. Liu, and it's published by the Chinese Medicine Database, and it's available. So she wrote this book of case studies and got some people to write prefaces and postscripts for it. And she got her son to take it out and publish it because women couldn't go out and do that kind of stuff back then. And then 60 years later, 65 years later, her grandnephew found out that she had had a book. He remembered her from his childhood when she was very old and he was very young, but he didn't even know she had written a book. And he looked everywhere and he had a really hard time finding the book. So it was published in 1511, yet her own grandnephew couldn't find it. Her family didn't even save a copy of it, apparently. And so eventually he was able to get a copy and he republished it. Today, there are no known editions of the 1511 version, but there is one copy we know of the 1585 edition published by her grandnephew in a rare books library in Beijing. This is said to be the earliest known writing by a female doctor in China. So it has, some historical importance. So how did she become a doctor? Tán wrote her own preface or her own introduction, and she tells her story kind of in 4 stages. So here's stage 1. She says, when my hair was hanging down, which is, the way children wore their hair. So she's saying, when I was a child, I waited on my father. And he would order me to sing certain poems and read aloud from texts, such as those on the education of girls or the classical filial piety. So, he's making sure she's educated, and just for entertainment, he's, quizzing her on these things and having her recite things. And so this would entertain him while he sat around and drank. So my grandfather then eventually was happy and said, wow, she's really smart. We shouldn't just make her do, embroidery and needlework, but we can let her study my medicine or our medicine. And so at that time, she could memorize, but she didn't understand the value of the words. We can already see she memorized poetry and books, about how girls should act and stuff like that. So she could memorize, but a lot of it didn't really have meaning to her. So that's stage 1. She could memorize. Later, I read books such as Nanjing, the classic of difficult issues, and Mai Zui, the pulse book that's in rhyme. I read those day and night without interruption. When there was free time, I asked my grandmother to explain the principles, and then I could see how brilliant they were, and I could easily understand them. So that's when I understood the value of the words, but I had never actually tried them out on patients. So that's stage 2. She's starting to understand the words, not just memorize them. When I was 15, my hair was put up and I married. This was, a common age back then. This sounds so young today, but back then this was fairly normal. So after she got married, though, she continuously suffered diseases of qi and blood. So they'd call the doctor, but first she would diagnose herself, and then she'd see what the doctor had to say and compare the results in order to improve her understanding. When they'd send out for herbs, and when the herbs arrived, she'd look through them to decide, are these appropriate or not appropriate? So she's testing herself on herself. Afterwards, I gave birth to 3 girls and 1 boy. When they were sick, I didn't use other doctors' herbal medicine. Rather, I, came up with my own formula, and then I asked my grandmother how to modify it. And so they must have lived close if she could ask her grandmother she's moved on to her husband's house, but she could still contact her grandmother. And so this was when I tested the medicine a little, but I didn't yet understand just how effective it was. So now she's practicing on herself and her children. Not a big practice, but she's, starting to apply what she learned. Then, when my grandmother was passing on, her beloved grandmother is dying, she personally gave me all of her books with formulas of proven effectiveness and the tools for herbal medicine treatment. She said, if you diligently memorize this, I can die content. So difficult. Her teacher, her grandmother, the one who taught her and cared for her, dying. I bowed and accepted the gifts, including the gift of her confidence. I was moved to tears and overwhelmed by grief. And then after her grandmother died, she suffered a disease that lingered for more than 7 months. She didn't know what was happening, but she was so sick. But because she was so sick, her mother secretly made funeral arrangements for her. This was something that was done. We have a different attitude today in the West, but a filial child would buy a coffin for their parent, like long before before they thought their mother or their father would die, and that was considered filial. They'd sew burial robes for their parents, and here, plenty of parents also had to bury their children, and so her mother thought, oh, it's time, and started arranging the funeral. So she was really sick if this was the case. In a stupor, I dreamed that my grandmother said to me, your disease isn't fatal. The formula is in this book, such and such a volume, such and such a page. Treat yourself according to that, and you'll recover within a few days. You're going to have a long life of 73 years. Actually, she lived longer than that. Your practice will surpass my skills, and you'll use it to aid people who are suffering. I awoke, like I startled awake, and forced myself to get up and look for the formula that her grandmother told her in the dream, and she completely recovered. And that's when I understood how effective the medicine was. They thought she was dying, and in a few days, when she found the right formula, she could completely recover. And after that, she started treating people. It's not like she had a doctor's office, but someone in her family would be sick and she'd treat them, and the maid would be sick and she'd treat her, and then the maid would go back and tell her family or other maids, and her just word of mouth, women started coming to see her. So many women started coming to see her because women like to have women doctors. Many women do. And so this is what happened. Let's look at a couple cases from Tán. I picked out for this one 2 cases on miscarriage. So I hope this doesn't trigger anyone who's suffering. But, this is something that she dealt with a lot. So there was a woman who was 26 or 27 years old, and she had been pregnant, but she had miscarried 6 times in total. That's a lot of sorrow. And remember, women were getting married at the age of 15 or 16, and now this is 10 or more years later, and she just keeps miscarrying. Even though she had been prescribed medicine, she still never successfully was able to maintain a pregnancy. So I asked her, what's going on with you? Tán was always really good about asking questions and listening very carefully and talking about emotions and really listening to her patient. So the wife was just angry, and she had pushed down this anger because it's not appropriate to be yelling at your husband or yelling at everybody. And so she had a lot of anger inside of her. Maybe she didn't like her husband, or maybe she was angry at the world because she couldn't have a baby, which was so expected back then. So because of this anger that wasn't expressed, then she had a lot of fire inside of her, and fire makes blood move recklessly. So she kept miscarrying. And so Tan used a formula that she calls 知足安胎饮. So 知足 is a herb that calms the fetus. Antai means calm the fetus, quiet the fetus, and yin is a drink. And so here's basically, that's a formula from Judanqi, and here are the herbs. If you want to know the dosage and stuff like that, you can look in my book or you can Google this online. So Judanqi just calls it Zusu Yin, but it is a formula to quiet the fetus. And so she uses a different name, but this is the formula that she used. And, Zusu Ye calms the fetus. And then there are a bunch of other herbs to warm and supplement, and not too many herbs to move. A little bit of movement in here. And so, okay, that's the formula. Later, she used these two herbs, baiju, which had been soaked in rice rinsing water. That was frequently how baiju was, and zangju were processed, the powder of it, and then they'd be stir fried dry after soaking in rice rinsing water, the cloudy water when you rinse rice. And then huangqin, which prepared with vinegar, which should have some holding in characteristic. One is fairly warm, one is fairly cold. So this formula isn't going to be too hot or too cold. And both of these herbs are said to calm the fetus. So make this into a fine powder, and every day swallow 2 qian, which would be around 7, a little more than 7.5 grams, mixed with, first they would decoct the zhisuye on an empty stomach. So zhisuye, perilla leaf, is also a calm the fetus herb. And so the fetus calmed down, and she gave birth to a girl. Well, they wanted boys, but at least she gave birth this time instead of miscarrying. We're going to see this formula again. Let's see what I have to say about it. Baiju and huangqin are a specific combination for restless fetus due to heat. Remember, she had fire. And Judanqi, the famous doctor from the Yuan dynasty, a doctor that Tan referred to all the time, he wrote, to quiet the fetus before giving birth, baiju and huangqin are wonderful medicine. And yeah, Zhuye also quiets the fetus and is used to treat morning sickness too. And so this small formula of these two herbs taken with a decoction of Zhuye, the powder, and then, you'd pour the Zhuye decoction on it, and then you'd drink it. It's also used in the next case we're going to talk about. It's not the next case in the book, but the next case we're going to talk about it. The same little mini formula, because my second case that I'm presenting is also on frequent miscarriage. So here we have a 36-year-old woman who gave birth 4 times. And then after that, she miscarried 3 times when she was 3 or 4 months pregnant. Because her husband was wealthy and high ranking, he was really worried about not having a son. So apparently the 4 times she gave birth, either they died or they were all girls. It's, she doesn't really say, but this woman doesn't have a son. So he wanted to take a concubine, because if the wife didn't give you a son, then that was the solution. Get a concubine and then, get her pregnant, and hopefully she'll give you a son. The woman, told me all about this, and she didn't have any way to prevent it, but it was, she was constantly sorrowful and angry, sorrowful about the miscarriages and not being able to do what she needs to do in the family, and angry maybe at her husband, maybe at herself. So matters of running the household were also quite numerous. She had a lot of work inside the house to do, further adding to her inability to become pregnant. So she was just stressed out and working too hard and yeah. So my opinion was that this was taxation, which means working too hard for a long period of time, and anger. So she's both deficient, and anger makes heat and fire. Internal fire got stirred up from emotional damage and then caused the miscarriages. So again, heat or fire. And Tan always paid a lot of attention to the emotions of her patients. They must have felt really good unburdening themselves to her about their family situation. So I gave her a pill with shangfu in it. And, I don't remember if I give you the ingredients. We'll see on the next slide, but you can Google these pills if you want to. In another visit, I gave her another formula. Note that like Qiaojing is regulate menstruation and Ichi is like Buzheng Ichi Tang. It's a formula to supplement. Okay. And these are the herbs that she added: Fuling, Chuanqiang, Xiangfu. So Xiangfu was in the first formula, but in the second formula, she added Xiangfu. And remember, stir frying until black is going to help stop bleeding for certain herbs. And Huangqian, which we already saw, will calm the fetus. Half a year later, she was pregnant. So this wasn't just one treatment. She took herbs over a longer period of time. Then I'm sure Tan was, modifying the formula as they went. And she also took powdered herbs to calm the fetus. This same thing of baijiu soaked in rice rinsing water and huangqin vinegar stir fried. And yeah, each dose is 2 qian, which is 7.46 grams, swallowed with a decoction of zhicuye. And then in the 5th month of the next year, which would be around June in our calendar, she gave birth to a son. So, I told you that Tan treated many things besides gynecology, but I did select, some gynecology cases here. So, but don't think that's all she did. Anyway, some of you probably know that Lisa C., who's a novelist that writes a lot of novels about Chinese women. She's written a novel based on, oh, look at that, sorry, typo, based on my translation. And we, talked a number of times and so forth. So it was pretty cool because I was a fan of hers already. So getting to know her a little bit in person. Anyway, she wrote a novel about Tán Yǔnxián based on, her book, Miscellaneous Records of a Female Doctor, including the intros, which talk about her life and including some of the cases that, of course, are fictionalized. And there are a number of life events that didn't really happen in her. Like afterwards, she does kind of explain what's really fictionalized and what's not. Also, there is a Chinese TV series about Tán Yǔnxián, at least that's what they say, but it really has nothing to do with her actual life, in that she's a palace doctor, which she never was. So I'm sorry, another typo in the last slide. I guess I made it too quickly. Anyway, that's my story. There are going to be 2 others in this series, one about a Qing dynasty doctor named Gu Dehua, and another about a late Qing dynasty doctor named Zheng Yi. So I'll talk to you then.